Where's David?
David's here.
I'm having trouble. There's so many people. There we go. I can see you now. So we have quite a number of people to arrive yet. We're on 56 people so far, but I think we should start because they'll arrive across the half hour, no doubt. So just wanted to welcome everyone, and I've not been looking at the chat. I've been a little busy in the background. And it's great to know just from your registrations that there's people joining this from all over the world. I mean, the interest in this topic is quite astounding and has perhaps taken a few of us by surprise. So David and I are going to welcome you this morning, and of course we do, and for us it's morning, although it's a very early morning for David in Bermuda. I'm in Paris, and there are other people who it's going into their evening and very, very late evening for some over on the west coast of the US. So this topic, interestingly enough, is more pertinent than what we could ever imagine given the times of the day. And I don't think we can start this conference without just sparing a moment of thought for Eastern Europe and wishing them courage and safeness. So that's a much broader issue looking around ethics. We're going to be looking at it directly within coaching and exploring a vast number of different topics, and I hope that you get a lot from that. We do have a sister project that I'd like to introduce, and I'll just share my screen so I can show you. Can we see that? No.
Yes.
It's the wrong one, that's all. Here we go. There we go. So myself and Jonathan Passmore and Eve Turner, she's here today. I can see her name in the squares. And Yiling Lei, who is also an academic in the UK, and David Clutterbuck, who I'm sure all of you know. So we are leading this book, a comprehensive account of ethics across a vast array of avenues in coaching, and it is a research to practice text, but it is designed for it to be highly practical as well, and to really give people an idea about what ethics is in practice. The cover is quite interesting, and I think it speaks to what ethics is, particularly for me, in that it is really messy. There's so many different tentacles to it that we need to be engaging in conversation about. So it's not going to be out until late 22 or 23, because it's a work in progress as we speak. But we look forward to bringing that to everyone later in the year. A few points to note about the conference is that we will be recording some sessions as we are now. The Q&As and the networking discussion groups will not be recorded, because we really want to entice people to be very actively engaged in it and coming together in dialogue, because that's what ethics needs. For it to really become something that's really alive and energizing, we need to be, and more accurate, we need to be engaging in discussions around the various topics that arise. So we encourage you to participate when you're invited to. We So, you're welcome to chat in the Q&A. If you want to ask questions later throughout the sessions, please put your hand up. The host will manage all of those. Until invited, we'd like you to keep your video off and to remain mute. And the different hosts will direct you to how they want things to be managed. So take your direction throughout the day from the hosts in the various sessions. Now I've just gone out of order and showed the book already, David, but I want to hand it over to you. And I know I didn't introduce myself, but that's okay.
We're learning as we go.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Thank you, Wendy-Ann. Well, when Wendy-Ann said to me, the book's fine, project's going really well, that's great, why don't we do a conference? I didn't get the significance of the we to begin with, but I've been really pleased to support and guide in every way that I can on this project. But I think I'd like to start with just by paying tribute to Wendy-Ann and the amount of energy, the sheer determination, and the skills that she's put into making this conference and bringing, I think, 240 people now registered, yes. Which is quite amazing, really, from scratch. I think it's also important to recognize all the work that's been done over the years by the main professional bodies in coaching and mentoring, just educating coaches about ethics and producing those relevant standards. We can snipe at all sorts of things, but actually it's an enormous amount of effort by a lot of people to try and begin this process of ensuring that the coaching profession, if we want to call it a profession, I prefer it to call it a provocation. Which is somewhere between a profession and a vocation, but it's there. That it is firmly rooted in and is an exemplar in a very troubled world of ethical thinking and ethical practice. We've got two sets of codes of conduct or sets of standards around ethics. One from ICF and the other from the rest of the global coaching and mentoring council. They're pretty much the same. I mean, there's some minor differences, but it would be amazing if they weren't similar. The whole point or the whole practice of codes of practice is they've got to be relatively straightforward, relatively simple, or they're just unworkable. I did quite a lot of work on ethics in financial services a while ago, and one of the things that we saw right off was that it was just putting people through a training program to make them understand a set of code of practice didn't really achieve anything. They didn't change people's behavior because they didn't change the way that people thought or whether they questioned themselves or each other. And it seems to me that the more detailed that codes of practice are, the more difficult that they are to police. But then, and it doesn't matter how complex or comprehensive they are, you can't cover everything. And of course, people can get very talented at adhering to the letter of a code of practice, but ignoring the spirit. And these are just some of the problems that we see. I think part of the problem with ethics is it's messy, as Wendy-Ann has already indicated. It's very contextual too. Ethical dilemmas always involve a conflict of values somewhere. Sometimes those conflicts of values are very deep. They just don't lend themselves to right or wrong or simplistic perspectives. So they're influenced by culture enormously, by whether the perspective is short-term or medium-term or long-term. They're influenced by whether they take place in an atmosphere of righteousness or an atmosphere of compassion. One of my current learnings, I think, from questioning some of my own ethical perspectives, it was only happened in a session, just a supervision session, just recently, where the word decolonization, and I know this is, we've got some of my colleagues here who've been working, who've pushed me into this recognition. With the word decolonization of coaching sounded great, but it was created in the context from looking out from within the Western civilization. I won't go into the details of it, but it's different perspective. It needs to be taken in different cultures. And we're learning all the time that we can't impose our perception, or we can try, but it isn't very helpful to impose one culture's perception of the ethical, of an ethical dilemma on others. It's also relevant, I think, that we all like to think of ourselves as good people. One study a while ago showed that over 80% of people in jail thought they were more ethical than average, or more moral than average. Clearly impossible, but we like to have this self-image of being a good person. It's rather like the other comparison is something like the same percentage of men think they're above average drivers. But that's the way we fool ourselves.
I would say that's women as well, David.
Quite possibly. I can only I can't comment. I've trained well over 200 ethical mentors in the health service in the UK, and it's been a fascinating journey. We've taken senior managers and coaches in the health service, and we've equipped them with an understanding of the principles and the psychology of ethicality and the complexity of it. And then we've given them a 6-part framework to work with. And in that framework, they articulate, they help the person to articulate the problem, what's actually going on here. They help them consider the context. Is this a new problem, an old one, who's involved and so forth, to consider the implications. So what happens if, in different scenarios? And to make sure they're bringing in different perspectives. So it isn't all a mono perspective. And then the balancing of the arguments, because it's always a conflict of interest, a conflict of values. And then the final check. Does this feel right? In a year's time, if I look back at it, would we be doing this differently? And I think if we put this into a wider context, every aspect of our world is becoming more complex, more nuanced, more difficult to understand from a single perspective. For people caught up in constant change, the instinctive defense is basically to seek refuge in certainty, and that the certainty that comes with taking a polarized view of the world. And anybody who doesn't share their limited perspective must be wrong. And right and wrong are themselves almost unethical perspectives, one could argue. So I think this conference is in significant part about expanding our understanding of the messiness and the complexity of ethics in coaching, and in the worlds that our clients inhabit. So as always, I've got a few bloody difficult questions that I'd just like to throw in as an input into our thinking. And the first one of those is our responsibility as coaches to the client who brings an ethical dilemma, or to the system of which they are a part? And the second one, what are we doing as a profession to role model ethicality and moral reasoning? And the third one is, what are the ethical issues that we're kidding ourselves about? As an example, are we really, as a profession, taking diversity seriously? And if we were, where are the next bunch of leaders in the field? Are they still predominantly people like Wendy and I, or most of us on the call? How are we making change happen? So how will we know this conference has been a success? One measure might be that every one of us goes away with an assumption challenged and more than a hint of discomfort about perspectives we arrived with. So I'd like to wish everybody an enjoyable, informative, challenging, and occasionally uncomfortable conference. Thank you, Wendy-Ann.
Thanks for that, David. I'm sure everyone's looking forward to feeling very uncomfortable. I just want to pick up on your notion around contextualization. And so it is true that context comes up in around different cultures, different particular scenarios, like different, whether it be in the workplace or whether you be at home, or whether you're working with people who are your peers as coaches, or whether you are working with people who are at a higher or lower level you in terms of the hierarchy of a workplace. So all these kinds of things create a different context that you have to be making ethical decisions around. But I want to give an example of how context can be a bit different from that as well. So I want to give a personal example around note-taking, for example. It's something fundamental to many people who are coaching, and often think you'll start practice, you'll make a decision about how you're going to keep your notes. We know about confidentiality. We have to maintain notes in a safe way that are not easily accessible to people who shouldn't get hold of them. But then you make that first decision and think, okay, I've made that decision. I've explored all my options. I've decided to take this course of action to keep everything as confidential as possible. And then they'll sit on it and won't ever revisit that concept of note-taking and what decisions need to be made around that. From my own experience in Australia, when I began just on 20 years ago, all my notes were paper and pen. They were locked away in a filing cabinet. I had to keep them for 7 years. Then I moved to France. And it's like, what do I do with my notes now? So legally, I had to hand them over to a trusted colleague to care for them for the minimum period that they need to be kept, and then they can be destroyed. But then moving to France, I had to then consider, what's happening with my notes now? I'm working a lot on my laptop. This is where I'm writing everything. I'm keeping notes on my laptop. So I need to make new decisions around my confidentiality concern with note-taking.
I see. Anyway, I can't go to work.
Then I've got someone here, I can hear a sound going. The other consideration was that I moved to France, and they have a whole different concept or a much tighter idea around privacy than what is experienced in Australia. You mightn't think it's the case, actually, but it is, in fact, culturally, it's very different, and that affects the laws around it and how stringently they hold them. Then I moved to storing everything on the computer, and it's like, okay, so how do I keep everything on the computer safe? How do I make sure that nothing happens to those notes? This is interesting. So another decision that I went through the process thinking about it, made the decisions and acted on it. And then I decided to use the cloud. So then I had to revisit note-taking again from an ethical perspective in relation to how do I keep things on the cloud and keep them safe? What things do I need to put in place? Should I actually be doing that? And then another point came later on when I changed laptops. I got a new laptop. So I had to revisit the whole concept of note-taking and the ethical considerations around privacy, for one, in relation to note-taking because of a new laptop. So context changes on the same topic across time. And I think this is really important, that no matter whether we are novice coaches or really experienced coaches, that we revisit these different facets of our practice again and again and again, and make new decisions according to the times that they're in, and the different tentacles that have pulled themselves into the different concepts that we're looking at. So that kind of is a good lead into the next session, which is about GDPR and privacy, and I will move on to them in a minute. But do you have any other comments to make, David?
Just muting myself again. Now, I think it's just wonderful to see so many people. Some faces I know, so many faces I don't know on this. So I think there's a real opportunity here for the community of coaches who are really interested in ethics and the professional or provocation to really come together and become much more of a guiding force, if you like, in making sure that we really do have the conversations that we need.
Yeah. I just want to say that I am a bit challenged here today because I have something going on that is sort of taking my attention. But I think we might just take a pause for a few minutes while I get set up for, get the speakers set up for the next session. What you can do is stay on this Zoom. You don't need to go anywhere for the speaker and panel sessions. So I invite you to make comment in the chat about this last half hour, and we'll get started on the next session very shortly. So I want to thank you, David, for joining us at 4 a.m. in the morning.
It's a pleasure. It's yeah, happy to be with you. So wonderful to see so many people come together.
Yeah. So enjoy Bermuda, lay back, you know, on a lounge chair, doing what you do. I'm going to go on mute for a second and just set up for the next session.
I'm sorry, I can't help myself. I don't think that we should feel that sorry for David. He's in Bermuda.
Yes, with a lot of interesting coaches as well. There's a thriving coaching community here, which
Is there?
Who I've been meeting up with and exploring the world from their perspective.
Oh, fantastic! I'd love to hear about that.
They've got an association of coaches for where they come together, you know, a bit informally, but it seems to be very an interesting parochial community.
So while we're waiting, does anyone have any comments that they'd like to make?